And welcome back, guys. Today was round number 6 of the Croatian Team Chess Championship, and I played against Grandmaster Aczel from Hungary, very experienced and solid Grandmaster, and I managed to win my game today. I'm actually quite happy with how it went. I played a very nice idea in the opening, a novelty which I found yesterday while preparing, and managed to play quite quickly, and yeah, then in the end managed to win the game. So quite happy, and we'll start in a second, but before we do that, I just wanted to tell you this is already my 3rd time that I'm recording this video, and if I check sometimes if OBS is also recording the audio in between of the analysis, then don't get worried about that, because simply the last 2 times there were some issues with the audio, and then in the end I had to sort of just throw away the recording, because at some point OBS just stopped recording the audio, which is unfortunate. As much as I like recording the recaps, after a couple of takes, it does get a little bit unfortunate. Anyway, let's jump into the game. So the funny thing about my opponent is that he actually had this line of the Nimzo-Indian, which we also had today already for the 4th time in this tournament on the board. So all of the games he played here were all in this line. And everyone sort of chose their different system. I was the first one of those players, I believe, to play the line with c5. Before he had d5 twice, I think once against, actually maybe in all of those games, but I remember one of his games against Shreyas, which was actually quite interesting also for me, theoretically, because I give this line for the black side in my Nimzo-Rogozin course with knight f3, knight d7. But he played this quite interesting in a quite an interesting way. I think he played a3, bishop e7, and maybe without a3 actually. Maybe he took here bishop d3, let's say c6, short castle, rook e8, and now this line with rook e1. And the idea of rook e1 is that if black goes now queen e7, black would have actually not here, like this. This is the position I meant. Because now if black would like to go queen e7, but now there's e4. That's the whole point. And now white is ending up on top, because this is not great for black. There's just too many threats on the e-file. And therefore white is kind of prophylactically aiming against this whole knight e4 plan with rook e1, and I think his game continued something like this against Shreyas, which is quite an interesting way to play this cast-but. Like typically you play either for the minority attack or you play with f3 and e4. But the plan here for white is actually to go rook a e1 and then e4 anyway. The line is fine for black, but I just didn't want to repeat the same line against him, because yeah, I managed to find something a bit more interesting. I think against Motilev you also had this line with rook e8, and there was something. Is it possible bishop d3? I think they had this line. cd4, knight d4, e5, knight e2, something along those lines. I think it was not exactly this, but pretty similar. He had against Motilev. That game ended in a draw. But I went for the line with c5, which is of course one of the ways you can kind of ask some questions about this move order for white, because now white is sort of obliged to play a3, because like in the Rubinstein with bishop d3, for example, you wouldn't really mind just to go into those Isolani positions, but knight d2 is simply a much more useful move than bishop d2, and that's why after c5 here, white doesn't want to go for something like this, because bishop d2 is just not as useful as knight d2. So a3, this is the line, this is all theory. Take on c3, knight e4. Now knight e2 is the main move. White also has some ideas like rook c1 or queen c2, which I think my opponent also played, but generally it's also not so dangerous for black. Like rook c1, b6, for example, is fine. So knight e2, now b6. We're still following sort of mainstream theory here, at least when it comes to this line. Played d5, still the main move. We also had some games, I think, with f3, and here there's one nice idea which I wanted to show you. Black goes bishop a6, d takes e5. There's actually this idea with bishop takes e4, and if white takes back, queen h4 check, regaining the piece like this, and black is equalizing. But generally black has a couple of different ways, like also cd4 should be completely fine for black here. He went d5, and now comes sort of the first surprise to my opponent, the move rook e8, which is already sort of rare. I think it's the fourth move in when it comes to popularity. More common is bishop b7 or bishop a6. Bishop a6 with the idea of if b3 then b5 comes. When there's some theory there, I remember one pretty crazy line where Buhmann had a couple of games, one against Nihal Sarin, but I cannot like fully recall how it appeared. It was some pretty long line with some sacrifice on f2 even. Was it after bishop a6? I don't think so. This was a separate line with b3 and b5, which seemed a bit easier for black. But I think there was something else here. Is it queen d3? Yeah, I think that was the line which I meant. Now e takes d5, queen takes d5. Now queen e7 is important. Taking on a8 is not yet possible because of knight c6, trapping the queen. And then there was it here? Maybe it wasn't here. Huh. Because white at some moment had the plan to play b3. Was it here? Oh, here it's not possible. Rook c1 first, knight c6. Also not. Queen d3. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure anymore. If you guys know which game I mean, let me know what is the exact move order. I'll probably also check afterwards. But there's one game for sure, Buhmann against Nihal from I think 2 years ago. Anyway, I played for this line rook e8, which already came as a slight surprise, but he still knew it. He went for g3, which is still the critical move. Rook e8 in general, the idea is that I want to keep my bishop on c8 still flexible. At some moment it could go to b7, and some moment it could also go to a6. Like for example, after queen d3 it would make a lot of sense because then I take, now the knight is protected, and then I can go bishop a6. And then take on c3 for example, and take on f1. Yeah, he played g3. Also after f3, like this was one line which for example I prepared, just so you guys know, this was some sort of concrete line which I had to know. Now queen h4, queen h6. White cannot take on a8 because this would be too dangerous. The queen is trapped. And so this is how it continued here. f4 was good, knight c6, bishop b7. And this is kind of how my analysis concluded here before the game, when black is equalizing because either knight a5 comes, putting pressure here, or knight d4. And I guess if rook d7, black can just play rook e7. That was actually one trick. Rook d7 loses because of bishop c8. I still had a look at this, which actually continues now to look at it, because rook c7 is still possible. But then I take on h3, and then I have bishop g2. And I'm not only winning the exchange, but even the rook. This is one of the rare cases where the rooks cannot protect each other while being in a double attack. So yeah, this was one of the lines here, which I prepared before the game. But he went to g3. Bishop b7, I think there are still some games here, ed5, cd5. But now is the novelty, which I played in the game, queen g5. I think before that, mostly some d6 or so, or knight takes c3 has been played. But queen g5 is a nice novelty, and especially practically speaking, it's not so easy for white now how to reply to this move, because the pawn on d5 is now under attack. And the computer doesn't really show the move at first, like specifically the live engine on Lichess, for example. But also the normal Stockfish, which I was using on my laptop locally, didn't really show it at first. But then I started to use a stronger engine with that one, and it really made it work quite quickly. So it's really, yeah, it's just crazy actually how strong engines are nowadays, that you can just immediately see if a line is playable or not, because it just goes to depth 50 or 60 in such a short amount of time. So queen g5 attacks the pawn on d5. This is kind of the main idea. So white has to play either knight f4 or take on e4. Taking on e4 looks like a very strange move, followed by knight f4. But this is actually the line which the computer wants to go for at first. And the idea is that if black is able to take on c3, especially if white has to take back with a pawn, then black has a pretty healthy structure and overall pretty good pieces, because the bishop on g2 is also not so great. And bishop takes e4. Now white wants to preserve this bishop on c3, so this is why the computer likes it at first. But then it starts to see this exchange sacrifice with rook takes f4. And actually I believe it's quite difficult for white because g takes f4 doesn't work because of queen g2. And this is one of the possible outcomes which I prepared for this type of position when white is technically up 1 point if you see it from a materialistic standpoint. But white has the doubled pawns, also there are opposite color bishops, and I'm only 2 steps away to put all of my pawns on dark squares. And yeah, I think practically speaking this could be quite interesting for black, especially if you're playing against an opponent that is not prepared here. Like one sample line which I can show you like this. I think there was also bishop b3 which I looked at. And of course it can be quite forcing, but white had to play actively with ideas like b4. And then I had a look at some lines like this. I don't know how exactly it went, but at some point d4 was possible. And how was it, like king f8 for example? Was it here, rook b7? I think that was one of the possibilities. And then d4, bishop d2, rook c8 or something like that. I think I looked at something similar. Is it possible? Yeah, I think that was the thing. And if white's bishop goes back here, then I have knight a5 and knight b3. I think this was one key idea in general, which was then quite dangerous for white. But yeah, you can have some fun with this endgame. As I said, engines are so strong nowadays. They will tell you probably also some things which can be interesting, at least when it's as concrete as this. But I like the whole feeling of the line, that it's already kind of a critical question for white even to go into that. It's not clear, like in the end it's anyway equal. But his alternative, what he chose in the game, it's also probably not entirely satisfactory for white. So I believe this line with rook e8 and queen g5 can really be a pretty nice weapon against this system. He played knight f4, probably the most logical move, just protecting the pawn on d5. And now I take on c3 and queen f6, which was still my preparation. Instead, my second actually proposed me to play the move bishop a6, which stops white from castling, but I didn't like fully understand this resulting position, because black cannot develop the knight to d7, but white also can't castle, but black is kind of relying on tactics here, because after c4 now important move b5, c takes b5, queen b2, attacking the rook and the pawn on b5. And there was some draw with rook takes c5. Computer was saying it ends in some perpetual. But once I saw this move rook takes c5, I immediately stopped to check the line, because I just didn't see the point to enter anything that forcing if it's not entirely necessary. And there is this good alternative, queen f6, simply with the aim to just develop the pieces. So now I have quite a simple plan. I want to go knight d7, knight d5, bishop c8, bishop d7. And the only thing I need to be careful of that white does not fully mobilize his central pawns, because this is kind of his only advantage in the position, that he has one extra central pawn. But yeah, if I'm careful and not allow that, then I have quite a healthy position. So castle knight d7. Also look at the time management now. Like I played basically the first 20 moves very, very quickly, which gave me a psychological advantage, but also simply it was nice to have this feeling that I have a lot of time to spend still. And now he needed to make a decision already. He also spent a lot of time on this move, because it's not so clear if white really wants to start moving the pawns immediately, or if he wants to play on the queen side, or what exactly his plans are if he hasn't looked at this position carefully at home. I looked at a4 as well at home, well, in my hotel room, and looked at this, like if white goes a4, a5, I thought it could be natural, but it's actually quite bad, because I can just take on a5. And computer was always loving this. For black, one line I was thinking about while I was sitting at the board was this: if he goes after the pawn, and I thought after g5 it's already really bad for him, because if the knight moves, then knight f3 comes, for example, like this, and yeah, it just looked pretty scary for white. Computer even said that it was even winning for black, which was not so hard to believe either. Yeah, he went for the move e4 instead, bishop c8 now, and now he played h3, which is probably a bit too slow. Instead, knight d3 would have been a better move, I would say. We also talked about that after the game. But also here black is fine, and again, strategically speaking, if I manage to get counterplay with b5 as well, I will always have the better bishop than him. And if f4, like queen b2 gave black enough counterplay, but also something like queen e7 should be sort of okay for black, or queen f6 if it works concretely. Yeah, he went to h3, and now he has quite a straightforward plan. He wants to play knight h5 and then f4 on the next move. And if I'm not careful and if I play something like bishop d7, this could be a little unpleasant. At least I thought so in the game, because I thought my knight is trapped. Then later I checked it, there's actually this nice trick with knight g4, which I didn't see in the game. And then black, in fact, is better. This was one line I looked at earlier. And black has 3 pawns for the piece. And if queen f3, there was queen f5, avoiding the exchange of queens, even though maybe the endgame would be okay as well, now that I think about it. Yeah, but after h3 now I played this nice prophylactic move, queen h6, because now he cannot go knight h5, because if he does, I will play bishop a6, and he cannot keep everything together, because either the knight on c4 will fall, the pawn on c4 will fall, or the knight on h5. Like, typically he wants to protect it like this, but here it just doesn't work, because in the end I can win the exchange like this. So here I played rook c3, which already looks a little bit awkward, but he wants to guard the third rank. But it did give me time to play this move g5 now. But it's already quite difficult, like after queen h6, because already h3 is hanging. G5 is anyway one of my ideas, and he was trying to probably play against that by placing the rook on c3, even though it's not entirely obvious if that really helps him. I'm not sure what he should have done now even. Like h3 was just a mistake. I think knight d3 should definitely be played. I thought that maybe h4 could be an idea, but it also looks very weakening. I thought even of playing like this, and then bishop d7, just to provoke f3, and then maybe some ideas with f5. Could even think about f6, g5 if I'm really asking for it, but that's probably a bit too much. Yeah, not so easy to say. Computer actually says that h4 is still the best, but yeah, h3 is simply the way where it went a little bit wrong. If we could leave it at that. So rook c3, and now anyway I played g5. The computer even said, I think it was here, that or maybe it was later, that bishop a6 was even stronger. No, that was 2 moves later. So g5 is good, because now if the knight moves back, I can take on h3. So he has to rely on this move queen h5. If knight h5, I have g4, and then if take, I will win the knight on h5. And if knight f4 back, I thought that this would be just pretty bad for him. I mean, he's not lost at the moment, but I would play something like bishop d7, king h8, and rook g8, for example. And it just looked pretty bad for him. So queen h5 still kind of the only move. I went queen g7 back. So also considering king g7 here to go into this endgame like this, but I didn't really believe that I have such great chances here. Like if he tries to go for an exchange like this, f5, and I think I was even still looking at this with f4. And it also felt like my king is like a little bit, not unsafe necessarily, but yeah. I think I even went so far to look at some like this and wasn't fully satisfied. But queen g7 anyway looks very natural, because the queen on h5 can sometimes also be misplaced. He played knight d2, and now I play g4, which is incredibly natural. But instead there's actually something better with bishop a6, but yeah, I'm not really upset about this, that I didn't find this, because this is how the computer wants to play now with b5. And he claims that simply the knight is not that great, and now all of my pieces are getting into the action. Maybe g4 can be still an idea. It's just kind of a Benoni on steroids at this point. Like, it's such a great version, having exchanged the dark squared bishops, and all of black's pieces are beautiful. Maybe an endgame like with queen g6 to come could also be insanely dangerous for white, strategically speaking. But I went for g4. By the way, I wanted to say one more thing in this line, I believe, with bishop a6, that Yeah, also here he could go for f4, and like even this, humanly speaking, is not so simple. I saw that the computer gave a clear advantage to black here, but like the game continuation just seemed very natural to play with g4. Because yeah, he cannot take, because then I win the knight on e2. And I have a couple of ideas like discoveries with knight f3 as well, but after his next move, which was pretty precise, rook fc1, it actually wasn't so simple for me how to continue now. Because now he wants to just put the knight back to f4, then maybe queen h4, knight h5, and yeah, I didn't really see like a straightforward plan. So after a lot of thought, 15 minutes, I went for h6 with the idea of going queen g5. Which is probably not the best plan in the position. Well, it isn't, obviously. Instead, I should go for king h8 here, which I think I briefly considered in the game with some immediate rook g8 ideas, but I just didn't fully see like how I will place my pieces after that and how I can sort of break through there. Like knight f4, and I'll just show you what the computer wants to do. Well, the queen has to go back somewhere, but white's position still looks quite solid here. Like, it is a bit ugly with the queen on h1, but I'm still not kind of achieving anything there. So the computer just wants to go rook g8 and rook g5 and rook g8. I don't know how it continues from there on, but well, it's also going to be difficult, I guess, for white to find any moves with this terrible queen there. I don't know if we can make f3 work at some point. Computer just plays a6 now. Yeah, that just doesn't work because of the sacrifice. Yeah, so this would have been nice when it looks like white is pretty paralyzed there, actually. Didn't fully consider it, just playing it that slowly. Yeah, so yeah, that would have been better. And now just one final question in this line which we showed. Knight f4. And if I start with this, does it make any sense? Then there's knight g6, yeah? Probably trapping the queen. Or just taking on h3, yeah? Because there are ideas to trap the queen like this, but there's actually still queen g5 here. And if rook e5, then the queen can go back or even give a check on d8. But I can play knight g6, and if queen g5, take on h3, win a pawn like this. So yeah, king h8 would have been a very strong move, but instead I played h6 with the idea of going queen g5 next. He played knight f4, queen g5, but actually now he had a pretty decent chance. Now the computer wants to take on g4 and now move the queen back. Which now apparently there's a difference because h6 is somewhat of a weakening move, actually, because I cannot play king h8, rook g8 as perfectly because this pawn is always going to be hanging. And I don't know if I'm in time for king h7, rook g8 in this position anymore. Yeah, king h7, yeah, it's actually still possible now. Knight h3, apparently very important move. Queen d2, f4. It's like chess on a completely different level. Bishop h3, bishop h3, not even taking with the queen back. Okay, that's pretty insane. Yeah, it also goes on, but I don't know how much value this will bring you guys, but the line is pretty cool. Knight f3 check, rook f3, queen c1. Now I guess he wants to bring the knight to d4. Unbelievable. When white is still a bit better, probably, because the light squares are pretty weak. Yeah, this is just some line here. But he took on g5 and went knight h5, which I also felt like is the reasonable continuation. Now he has this threat. Played rook e7. Just stepping out of the knight f6 check idea, forking the rook and the king. He has to sort of take on g4. Could also play this first, but that only gives me the extra option of taking with the knight instead of with the bishop. So there was those exchanges, and here I felt like I probably missed my chance, and he should be okay. But he was pretty low on time already, and there were still 10 moves to make until the time control. And still many pieces on the board, so many things can happen. So I didn't really have the feeling that the game would now be immediately a draw or anything like that, but yeah, I had this feeling that there should have been something earlier, but I wasn't really upset about it. I was just thinking about it after the game, where was kind of the moment, and now we know where it was. But the position turns out actually not to be so simple for white here, because he does have like strategically some issues. Like if he goes for like something like this, I'll have g4 ideas, and this would obviously be quite sad for white, even though maybe it's not lost. But I'll maybe bring my king to e5 and or even to f4, knight e5. I just have this full dark square bind, and maybe at some point I can break through with this. But there are these strategical dangers for white here. So he plays f4, very natural. Preparing some breakthrough with e5 here. Rook a to e8. And now rook f1 was the first inaccuracy. So that bishop h3 would have been better. And here in the game, I think I was relying, yeah, we were both relying on knight f6. And here we actually both missed quite a cool thing. In this line we were looking at. And here we thought that there's simply nothing left here because I'm going to play g4 in the next move, and then the d6 pawn is probably going to be more weak than any of a strength. But white actually has this pretty cool move, bishop c8. And now if I go rook b8, there's d7 all of a sudden, and I cannot stop the pawn from queening. I can only sacrifice my knight. The funny thing here is that I can even I can still play rook d7, and this position is actually not worse for black, because I'm only in exchange for a pawn down, and I have king f8, king e6, and this d6 pawn could be weak as well, and I'm blockading the pawn for now nicely with the knight. So that was a pretty cool detail here with bishop c8, but yeah, we both missed that. Yeah, what did I want to say? After bishop h3, f5 was also possible. Yeah, this was another line, but this was only computer generated. I didn't think about this so much in the game. That was just pretty insane. I saw this earlier, that apparently this is a draw here. Like I would never think that's the case. It looks just completely lost. But it was interesting because I guess after f6 I can just stay on this square, king g6, and then go back. And maybe white is not in time to play with g6, but yeah, my human judgment would immediately tell me that this has to be lost for black here. But he went for rook f1, and now I did not follow up precisely. I took on f4. Instead, I should immediately go f5. I played it after capturing, which does have the downside that now he has rook g3, which wouldn't be possible. I just had the feeling I wanted to clear this tension there, and yeah, that was basically all I was relying on. Even though I understood that rook g3 is gonna come, I thought here I'm kind of giving him just some extra options like taking on g5. I even saw this line that here I have e3 in the end, and he cannot take because of e2. But I still kind of just wasn't fully convinced here. Even knight e5 is better for me, as it seems. And I'm not sure if I actually missed that or if I saw it. I don't like fully recall that, how I was feeling during the game about this. I just see that my light went out, so I hope you guys can still see and also hear me well. But now I just checked, OBS is still audio recording, so that is good news. So I don't know what exactly happened at this moment, but I just tried to also play sort of fast, so wasn't like feeling that this is the most important kind of moment to spend a lot of time now. So I took and then played f5, he played rook g3, pinning my knight, played king f6, and here there were a couple of pretty nice variations. If he plays e5, which does not work, but I needed to calculate a couple of things for that to be sure. And I will just show you some lines which I looked at. Most of them are not fully correct, but there were a couple of cool motives. Like I was looking at this, rook g4, take on g4, now d6. Now I thought that if black would go, for example, here, then, well, maybe there's bishop c6, but there was also generally this idea, which I had in mind in many of the variations, winning the rook in the end. And I saw one pretty cool idea. After d6, I actually wanted to take here on f4. So that was important here. If white doesn't take on g4 first. Take on f4, if white takes here, then take here. But the cool thing was that here after e takes f4, there's also rook g4. And I was looking at this. Take on g4 back. Rook f4 doesn't work because of king g5. Then this rook is attacked, so white cannot take on e7 comfortably. And if white takes on e7 here, then I have f3. And in the game, I was looking at it until here, and then I just kind of concluded it and said, okay, at least I'm not going to lose, and maybe I will have some pretty good winning chances. And it turns out that this is actually completely winning here. And another thing that I spoke to with my opponent after the game was then the pawn endgame, which is actually not like winning on the spot, even though it should be. But black should manage at some point to kind of zugzwang white out of it, because now if this comes, if the king goes too far away, then king c6, b5 wins. And if the king tries to stay here, like let's say this position, then I will either put him into zugzwang with a5 and then just get inside like this. And we were also thinking that, yeah, we were thinking about it a little bit differently, that black needed to get the king to c6. What was it exactly? That black needed to have this position with white to move. For some reason we got it here, because then if king e4, then b5 wins. And if king c3, then king d6, king e5 wins. This was kind of our rule, which we discovered. Just now b5 is a draw because the king is already on c3. That's the important thing. Yeah, that was some nice ideas here, but yeah, I think black had a couple of different ways to continue from there on. Just some nice ideas there. e5 generally doesn't work here. He played rook e1, which is still a good move. Now I played rook g7, and now my idea is actually to take on e4, so I'm defending the knight on g4. And here he blundered with the move bishop h3. He still had a couple of ways to keep the balance, but practically speaking it was quite difficult. And especially with low time, it was not so simple here. After the game, we thought that rook e2 is a nice defense, which probably works, but it's not an easy move because it's not clear what exactly white wants now. Probably it does prepare bishop f3, because then it will work, because in the end there's a defense with rook g2. We'll understand it in a second. But not a simple move to find, especially with 39 seconds on the move. Bishop f3 would have also been better, because now after f takes e4, you should take with the rook. And this was one of the possible lines which I looked at in the game, but I thought I didn't really have any chances here. Because also the problem is if I try to break through with b5, take c4, there's king f2. At least I thought so. Actually, there's knight g4 now. Hang on. Knight g4 is winning. Then why is this not good? c4. Bishop e4, c3. Wow, it actually continues. I didn't see that at all in the game. Knight b4, b6, take. And it's a draw somehow. I cannot take on d5 because of b7. And then we're gonna reach some position like this. And both sides cannot make progress, so I have to repeat with the knight. Pretty cool line, actually. I didn't see that. I just thought also that knight takes d5, a4 shouldn't be anything. Even though I am a pawn up. Yeah, it's actually also quite concrete, a5. I think I didn't even see that the pawn on f4 here is hanging. For some reason I thought the king would be in time to reach f3. So yeah, a lot of difficult practical questions for white to answer here. So he misstepped with bishop h3, and now I can anyway take on e4, because if he takes on g4 with the bishop or with the rook, I will have rook g8, pinning the bishop and the rook, and actually the ensuing rook endgame is just completely lost for white. Also, if he takes with the rook, then it's going to transpose to the game, and I'm going to take on g4. So yeah, this happened all in the game, and even though it's a rook endgame with same material, now I play king f5, king f3, rook h4, and he can basically resign here, because first of all, I'm threatening to win the rook with rook h3, but secondly, once he goes away with the rook, then I just take all of his pawns. I take f4, I take c4, and then also I'm going to take a3, and then with 3 connected passers, black is easily winning. Even though white has this pawn, black will probably also win it sooner or later. So that was pretty unfortunate for him, that it's his structure is just not so great now anymore, and all of the pawns are falling kind of like a Christmas tree. There was also one thing which I thought about here, like I briefly considered playing rook g3 just for like a split second, king g3, king e4. Then I thought like, oh, I'm probably breaking through with b5, but then I saw, oops, white has a4, so this wouldn't be a good way. Maybe black even needs to be careful now here. Yeah, it's even completely winning for white. But okay, I anyway played then rook h4 fairly quickly. This was just like a split second thought. And he tried king g3, but it doesn't really matter at this point anymore. He tried this pawn endgame when, yeah, black is of course easily winning, but it's not as easy as you might assume at first. I mean, that's kind of a stupid thing to say because I'm winning with numerous ways, but white does have some resources, like after king takes f4, now a4. I was looking at this line now when b5 is winning, but something like this, for example, wouldn't be so clear, because then white is also queening, and probably in the end it's even an immediate draw, because white will take on b6. Black is the first one to queen, but still, yeah, probably still winning for black, but you get my point. There are some defensive resources. But here, like in the game, I calculated that b5 wins, and then if a5, I'm in the triangle like this. But I chose another win, I went b5 immediately. Now if he takes, I can even take here. That was another pretty line I was looking at in the game. And this is how far I got. And checkmate on h1, even though white was able to queen. Unfortunately not with the check. So he tried king g4. And now an important thing was to take c4, now king e5, a last precise move. Because if I start pushing the pawn immediately, I still need to show some technique here, and white does always have some perpetual or stalemate ideas. But with king e5, now I force king g5, and then I go c3, because now I'm going to promote with the check. If f6, c2, f7, c1 check, and white is not able to promote in time. So overall, I'm quite happy with the game. I'm also quite happy that OBS this time recorded the whole audio for the whole video. So hope you guys enjoyed today's recap and the analysis, and especially hope that some of you will be able to use this idea in the opening with queen g5, which hasn't been played before. I think it's quite a cool line against this bishop d2 Nimzo, which is becoming more and more popular nowadays. So let me know what you guys think about the line if you will play it yourself, and apart from that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.